Good morning, everybody. How about that keynote speaker for those of you who are in here? Wasn't that amazing? Fantastic. I had to shed a few tears, I'm not going to lie. I want to thank again the Perlmutter Center for Legal Justice for sponsoring our keynote speaker this morning. And I wanted to say it's my honor and privilege today to present a couple of awards from the Forensic Science Foundation. This award it's meant to nurture a productive dialogue between emerging judicial and forensic standards of reliability and validity. The award is presented to the author of the best paper on any topic focusing on the reliability and validity of techniques, processes, or methods in forensic area of the author's choice. Each of the following awardees submitted abstracts and presented them at last year's annual scientific conference. We're excited to announce this year's winners of the Emerging Forensic Scientist Award. Our first awardee is Elaine Chu for her presentation on expanding the scope of subadult stature estimation. Elaine, are you here? I know you were here earlier. Oh, there you go. Kip, or Ken, can you go handle the award? Wonderful. Great, thank you, Elaine. Congratulations. Our second awardee is no stranger to the stage here because she has been awarded before. Her name is Yachi Chang for her presentation on the development of a next-generation sequencing panel targeting cannabinoid synthase genes to distinguish between marijuana and hemp. Is Yachi Chang in the house? Hello. Wonderful. Thank you. And our final awardee is Sarah Walton for her presentation on toxicological surveillance of clinical patients presenting to the emergency department after suspected opioid overdoses, geographical trends and impacts on forensic toxicology. Is Sarah Walton here to receive her award? Oh! You're so fast, Sarah. Okay, well that does it for me today, but please join me in congratulating one final time these three deserving recipients of the Emerging Forensic Scientist Award. And I'll just note that the Forensic Scientist Foundation this year awarded over $160,000 in grants and scholarships. So we would hope that all of you would be looking at our website to look at the different various awards and scholarships to see how you might be available to apply and be awarded these at next year's conference. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful conference.
Please welcome to the stage the chair and co-chair of the 2024 plenary session, Vincent Desiderio and Dean DeCresci.
You have a setup for how you'd like them to sit, or just naturally, however it goes. There. Perfect.
Wow. Good morning, everyone. It's a couple of people here today, I think we can all agree that was an incredibly powerful opening this morning, and we're hoping to build on that today with the plenary session. But before we get into it, just a quick announcement. I regret to inform everybody that Taylor Swift is not going to be performing after this. So I thought, when I saw the size of this room, that's what I was kind of thinking. We have probably well over 1,000 people here, wouldn't you say, Ian?
Absolutely. Double.
We got a lot to talk about. We really do want to build on that message this morning. We have 4 incredibly talented speakers, along with the incredibly talented president of the American Academy of Forensic Sciences, Ken Williams, that's going to join in the conversation. Just to lay down some ground rules, talk about, a little bit about how things are going to go. Dino and I are going to talk about, we're going to frame some questions to the group after Ken opens things up with discussion. And then hopefully everybody's going to have a really strong discussion up here on the stage, but I want you to all know that you're part of this process. So at the end of this discussion, there is a microphone up front. So anybody that wants to engage with the panelists up here, please come up to the microphone and pose your questions or comments to the group for further discussion. In order for this to be as powerful and thought-provoking as possible, we need your participation. But on behalf of Dino and myself, we do want to thank you all for coming, and we want to thank the panelists for all their preparations in getting this together, because there has been a lot of preparation that's gone into this session. Without further ado, we're going to begin our introductions of the speakers, and I can tell you you're in for a treat. These are some thought leaders in forensic science right now. They're contributing on many levels in many different areas. We have forensic foundations covered, forensic research areas covered, practitioner perspective, human factors, and the legal perspective. So it's going to be a very powerful and thought-provoking session. So our first individual, sitting right to the left and your right of President Williams, is Dr. Adele Quigley McBride. Dr. Quigley McBride received a Fulbright Science and Innovation Award, which she used to complete a PhD in psychology, specializing in the causes of error and bias in legally relevant contexts. After receiving her PhD in 2020, she began work as a postdoctoral researcher at the Wilson Center for Science and Justice at Duke Law, working alongside Professor Brandon Garrett. Dr. Quigley McBride is now an assistant professor in the psychology department at Simon Fraser University in BC, Canada, British Columbia. She teaches undergraduate and graduate level psychology and law courses, and continues a program of research assessing the causes of and solutions to error and bias in the criminal legal system. The error and bias, that's my New Jersey, New York coming out there. I apologize for that. Dr. Quigley McBride is dedicated to closing the gap between research and practice, demonstrated by her role as vice chair of the OSAC Human Factors Committee and as the human factors representative on the OSAC Dogs and Sensors Subcommittee. Dr. Quigley McBride is funded by the Center for Statistics and Applications in Forensic Evidence, otherwise known as CSAFE, to research the decision-making processes used by latent fingerprint analysts and to create simple tools that can easily be incorporated into analyst workflows to improve quality and transparency of forensic decision processes. Del, if you want to just give a quick wave to the crowd and everybody give her a nice warm welcome.
And thank you all for coming. Our next panelist is Dr. Sarah Chu, who's sitting in the middle. As the Director of Policy and Reform, Dr. Chu leads the Perlmutter Center's Forensic Science Policy Initiatives. Prior to joining the Perlmutter Center, Dr. Chu led the Innocence Project's policy portfolio on forensic science, forensic medicine, and police investigative technologies for 15 years. Her research interests include oversight and accountability of criminal investigative and forensic science methods and technologies, their ethical, legal, and social implications, and capacity for just and equitable implementation. Dr. Chu served on the Scientific Inquiry and Research Subcommittee of the National Commission on Forensic Science and was the 2021 recipient of the Legal Aid Society Magnus Mukoro Award for Integrity in Forensic Science. A graduate of the University of California, San Diego, Dr. Chu holds bachelor's degrees in biochemistry, cell biology, communications, and a master's in biology. She also holds a master's in epidemiology from Stanford University and completed her doctorate in criminal justice at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, which is a City of New York graduate center. Dr. Chu is a member of the 2023 to 2024 class of the Harvard Medical School Center for Bioethics Fellowship Program.
Okay, sitting on the far end, a man who probably needs no introduction, but we'll get one anyway, is Dr. John Butler. Dr. Butler conducts forensic science research at the National Institute of Standards and Technology. He received his bachelor's degree in chemistry from Brigham Young University in 1992 and his doctoral degree in analytical chemistry from the University of Virginia in 1995. You put the dates there, John, so don't want to date you, but his graduate research performed at the FBI laboratory pioneered the techniques now used worldwide in forensic DNA typing, as everybody in this room is, I'm sure, aware. In addition to 200 scientific articles and book chapters, he's written 6 textbooks on the subject. He served as the vice chair of the National Commission on Forensic Science from 2013 to 2017, and was the 2017 recipient of the Paul L. Kirk Award from the American Academy of Forensic Sciences Criminalistics section. And this is a really cool point on here. In 2023, he was named the #1 most highly cited author in forensic science in the United States, and currently serves as the president of the International Society for Forensic Genetics, which represents 1,300 scientists in 80 countries. Please welcome Dr. John Butler.
Our next panelist is Ms. Tiffany Roy, who's sitting second from the right. Ms. Roy is a forensic DNA expert with 17 years of experience. She's worked in public and private DNA laboratories in the United States and has reviewed DNA reports and standard operating procedures from labs across the country and around the world. For the last 4 years, she has volunteered for the NIST Expert Working Group on Human Factors in Forensic Interpretation, and that work has focused her attention on communication of forensic DNA evidence in reports and testimony. Her experiences reviewing reports and testimony during a transition from manual to computer-assisted interpretation have given her unique insight into how quality management systems function and the limitations of accreditation. She's a strong advocate for forensic science oversight at the state and federal level. And so if you would give her and Dr. Chu, I didn't say that, a warm welcome, and all of our panelists.
All right, it's now my pleasure to bring my good friend and colleague and our president, Mr. Ken Williams, center stage here. He's going to give a couple opening comments and then kick off the conversation with our panelists. And Dean and I are just going to kind of awkwardly stand off to the side.
Thank you, Vinny.
Thanks, buddy.
Thank you so very much for being here. When I spoke with the plenary session chairs and co-chair, I just wanted them to create a panel or space for us to continue that conversation. That conversation around Justice for All started last night with our diversity outreach reception and evening session, where we had someone come to speak to challenge us as an organization to create spaces where we can have those difficult conversations. And those were the difficult conversations that were mentioned by our keynote speaker just under an hour ago. And so just going back to that diversity outreach reception that we had, we were fortunate to have a sponsor for that as well, Justice Tracks. So there again, it just aligned so perfectly. And with Sarah being here today, with her center being a part of sponsoring the keynote address, it just shows us how the vision comes together when we all work together as a group, as a community. Because as I mentioned, it takes a village to promote justice for all. It also takes a village to put together a fantastic program. And it started today with the keynote address, and it will certainly continue with this plenary session. But to get started, I want to talk a little bit about justice for all and what it means to me. Because justice for all has been chosen as the theme for this entire year. And that is something that we have done as a community and as an entire forensic science organization. It is important for all forensic practitioners to understand your role in promoting justice for all. But specifically, what justice for all means to me. It is justice for the alleged victim, justice for the defendant, justice for the families of all parties involved. And that's regardless of your race, your gender, your socioeconomic status, or any other factor that leads to bias. Because unfortunately, the consequences of racial, socioeconomic, and gender disparities have created unequal justice outcomes in our communities. And we must do something to address that. As Brian mentioned, we must all beat the drum of justice. And if we beat that drum together, we can create a better environment, one that brings about equitable justice outcomes for all people. Because that's the intention of what we are striving to do. But unfortunately, justice has been elusive to so many people. But if we work together to help promote that justice for all that has served as a reminder for the entire forensic science community, not just this week, not just this past year, but this point forward, we can create a better situation for all people. I look forward to this plenary session. I look forward to hearing from these wonderful speakers that the chairs have put together. And John, I just want to warn you, I have one article and one book review, so I'm well on my way to taking your spot as the #1 quoted forensic practitioner in the US. So watch out. So now I ask the panelists, I've told you what justice for all means to me. And if you've read any of the newsfeed articles that have gone out, which I hope you have, there's also an editorial in the Journal of Forensic Sciences, which if you haven't read, I hope you will. That will explain a little bit more about what justice for all means to me. But I'd like to ask the panelists.
Right here. So.
Oh.
I have your article right here. So.
I told you I'm well on my way. I'm going to be quoted. So Adele, we start with you. What does the phrase justice for all mean to you, and how do the forensic sciences intersect with this concept?
So just starting with the small questions.
Yes,
Okay.
right away.
So my path to my career sort of framed my perception of justice. I actually started out thinking I wanted to be a lawyer, and I took a couple of psychology interest classes and immediately got hooked. So I was doing a law degree and a psychology degree at the same time, and I learned pretty quickly that what I was learning in law school didn't really align with what I knew about how people thought, how people felt, how people behaved. And I decided that I wanted to use science instead to try and achieve justice. So decided not to become a lawyer, and decided to turn to research. And now I'm an experimental psychologist, and I spend pretty much all my time trying to use the scientific method to try and achieve justice in my way. I use data, I use experiments, I listen to forensic analysts, I listen to people who are practicing in the field, and try to present practical solutions that will achieve justice both from the bottom up and the top down. And I do think that forensic science has great potential to contribute to justice for all in a very special way. Forensic science is not quite there yet, but it does have that potential. It has the potential to seek out the truth of the matter. It has the potential to, it has already done this. You can see it with the DNA exonerations. It can bring justice to people. And I know that there's a hunger for that among forensic analysts, the ones that I work with. They really want to see change, both systemic change and cultural change. And so I think that we need to help them and work with them to build a new system around them that can help them use the scientific method to bring justice for all and to bring equality and accuracy to the legal system. So that's what justice for all means to me.
Thank you.
I guess I'm next.
Sarah?
So, in thinking about theories of justice, I think that some of you have seen the presentations I've given in the past, and I've explored different philosophers. And this last year, I've been doing a fellowship in bioethics, where I've been digging down and had the opportunity to dig down into different theories of justice. And the one that I feel really attached to, that I think communicates really well what we're here for, is a theory by T.M. Scanlon. And so he's developed this theory called contractualism. But let me go back for a little bit. So we're all here because we want to do justice. And it's so hard to know when it's been operationalized, and how do you know when you're doing justice? And that, Philosophers going back to Plato have talked about how justice is the fundamental virtue of society. And you know when you're being just when you're doing what is morally right. So what is morally right? And philosophers have spent centuries discussing this, so it's not on us to like figure everything out, but I feel like T.M. Scanlon's framework of contractualism helps us get there. And what his theory says is that morality exists in relationships between people. And so when you know that an action is morally wrong, if you can't justify it to the impacted person. And then he summarizes it beautifully with this phrase, and he says, so what do we owe to each other? So when we're doing, I'm not a forensic scientist, but when testing is occurring, when you're in a case, what do we owe each other? And some of the things that I think we can talk about, what we owe to each other, what we owe to victims, defendants, to the justice system, to the public, to the scientific enterprise, are a few concepts. So the first being that justice never expires. So if you're wrongfully convicted and you've done your time and you're out, it still matters that you want to clear your name. If you have committed a crime, that society shouldn't be casting you out and throwing you away as a person. That science, that we all share values, that science should be driving fact-finding, and that we should be applying scientific values to the work of forensic science. That transparency ensures justice because it allows everyone to see what is happening. Accountability, and another way I'd like to think about accountability, and maybe this is something that we can talk about later, is a theory of repair. So in science and technology studies, there's a theory called repair, and a lot of tech innovation is focused on, technology studies are focused on innovation, but repair is looking at how organizations respond to breakdown. Because when something breaks, or there's an error, or there's a change in science that you need to address, that how an organization responds, that tells you what values that organization has. So thinking not accountability, not in a punitive way, but with the framework of what opportunity do I have in this repair? And then finally, humanity and dignity, that it's owed to everyone. So I challenge you all. I love that AAFS brings together everyone in the criminal legal system community. And so as we go about our work, that we can always be challenging ourselves using that framework of what do we owe each other.
Yes. Thank you, Sarah. Tiffany.
So I just want to thank the chairs and the president for this amazing platform. I feel honored to be up on the stage with these amazing researchers and scientists. And so I think one thing that's standing out to me right now is my perspective of justice might be just a little bit different than the rest of the panel. And I listened to Sarah talk, and she's so eloquent, and she's quoting philosophers, and I'm like, oh my God, theory. My experience with the justice system has come from cases, working with people, human people, that have been impacted by forensic science and the criminal justice system. And so sometimes I struggle to deliver my message as eloquently as, Sarah and others. But, justice for all, when I read that, and through my experience, it's like an ideal. It's like a 0% error rate. It's something that we should strive for, but I don't know is attainable. It's like remediation of all bias from human people and all error. Like, we'll never get there. We can only hope to improve. And that's how I feel about justice for all and our role as scientists in that larger system. We need to strive for constant improvement, and my opinion on how we would do that is through meaningful oversight. And we don't have that right now and we absolutely need that if we're going to make any forward progress toward more just outcomes. So justice for all, to me, those are just words. That was a slogan, you know, in the Pledge of Allegiance, where they had little kids, you know, salute the flag and indoctrinate them with all the American ideals. But to me, that doesn't really have any meaning. I think we need to strive for justice for more and justice for most, and just keep working toward constant improvement of all of our systems in pursuit of the ideal. Not that I don't think we'll ever achieve perfection, because we're human, and the justice system is a human endeavor. But I think we need to take accountability for our role in a system that we recognize is flawed deeply. And the way that we can do that is to hold each other accountable and raise the level of standards and practice. And we will do that through meaningful oversight at the state level and also at the federal level. And I'm going to use every platform I'm given as long as I can to advocate for that, because I think that's our only way forward.
Thank you, Tiffany. John.
Thank you. Well, as a federal employee, I have to say these are my own opinions. You know, I'm from the U.S. government. I'm here to help you. That's what people say, right? But I'm grateful for this chance to be able to talk and think deeply about this topic. As a kid, I grew up saying the Pledge of Allegiance that was referenced. The words, you know, finishing with liberty and justice for all, that's where the phrase comes from. That was written in 1954, the same year as Brown v. Board of Education. And so understanding the history of where it's an ideal. We strive for that, but there's many struggles we're going to have in terms of reaching that. But to a certain extent, if you look at all the different people that are involved in the criminal justice system, there's one that can never receive justice fully, and that's the victim. And I can tell you, as an example for myself, 11 years ago, our home was burglarized. My home computer was stolen, which I wrote 3 of my textbooks on, and that was gone, and along with thousands of pictures of my kids. And we had backups that were also stolen. We've gotten the computer back. The person that was involved, people involved, were prosecuted and everything, but there's still not justice in terms of not being able to be restored. And I know my situation is much simpler than others have faced more complicated things. But being a victim, you appreciate the justice system in a different way. And the justice for all, like I said, is something we strive for. It's something we have an ideal to work towards. But I think as forensic scientists, we should be thinking about justice for the evidence. So can we put forth the best evidence so the data can speak for itself? And that's really what the effort should be, is around producing the best evidence, measuring well, interpreting that well, and sharing that well with others. Now, I speak from my own personal experience, which we all have different perspectives up here. Mine is from working with the National Commission and hearing different voices that are so important to come to the table, and that's why I'm grateful to have a panel like this where we can have this type of discussion. It also comes from spending the last few years working on the scientific foundations of various disciplines and realizing there's much we can do to improve, and understanding what data is there and what we can share with others. We want to be able to communicate that clearly, and hopefully we'll get into that more in further questions. So.
Thank you, John.
All right, thank you, Ken. Channeling my inner fantasy football commissioner, which I'm terrible at, by the way, and probably that reference is lost on most of you in the audience anyway. We're going to start in reverse order with John. And John, you already touched on this a little bit. We're going to get a little bit more granular on this concept of justice for all and be a little bit more specific with respect to the role of the forensic scientist. So what is the role of the forensic practitioner in navigating the different interests of our justice partners and ensuring justice for all?
Well, I mentioned I would cite our dear president, Ken Williams here, so that he has, that's a citation for him, right, to help there. But in his article, he mentions 3 things I think are key laying this out. Forensic practitioners are often called upon to 1, use their knowledge of scientific principles, 2, explain evidence items, and then if the results of the examinations are subsequently used in courts of law, which happens around 2% of the time, because there's lots of plea bargains and so on, but the forensic practitioner may be needed to then, 3, explain the results to the attorneys, judges, and the jurors. So you really look at that as we want to use science well, we want to explain and take care of the evidence properly, get the most out of that evidence, and then be able to explain that to other people that are going to use that information. So that's kind of how, just in a short, I view justice for the evidence is how we should operate as scientists doing the best job there. So.
Absolutely.
Let's open it up to the panel for any further discussion on your thoughts.
Who wants to go first? I'll go first. Can you repeat the prompt just so that I know like exactly what I can address right now?
Okay. So the prompt is, what is the role of the forensic practitioner in navigating the differing interests of our justice partners and ensuring justice for all?
Right, so there are so many competing interests that we are always going to have to deal with. We are an actor in the justice system, in an adversarial system, where not all the people that are involved in the work that we do share the same ethical obligations and motivations. And we need to recognize that. I'm in a courtroom and I'm being asked questions by a partisan attorney, and how that impacts, the presentation of my work is extremely important. And what I would say is, for all the political pressures and all of the, adversarial pressures and all the other pressures that influence forensic science, we have a duty to protect the evidence, to protect the science from those other actors and whatever their motivations might be. And so when you're in a court of law and you're being asked questions about your evidence, you want to make sure that you're answering in a way that is a full and fair depiction of all the strengths and the limitations of what that evidence can help the court with. What questions can that help answer? And what questions will it never answer? And what questions does it not address? And not to let your evidence become part of a partisan narrative, a part of the advocacy of these lawyers. And it's a difficult thing. I know that a lot of forensic scientists do not feel empowered in the courtroom, and they're intimidated by the lawyers. It's like correcting a lawyer on the witness stand is not a very comfortable thing to do, but it's necessary sometimes. And you're the only thing that's going to stand between someone using your evidence in a way that could cause a wrongful conviction or cause somebody to get away with a serious crime. And you need to protect the science so that it's understood, best understood, and not misunderstood by the people who have to make legal decisions based upon it.
Okay. Sarah, I'm going to throw it to you because I saw you give a very insightful presentation on some of those concepts yesterday that Tiffany just mentioned. So maybe you could take it from there a little bit and talk about some of the challenges. Yeah.
I'm so glad that Tiffany mentioned the adversarial system and the impact of it, because as forensic scientists, you must operate within a legal system that has principles that really contradict scientific principles. And we've talked about that a lot, about how law and science don't mix. And I keep talking about this book because it's really good. It's a book by Beth Betschke called Blood, Powder, and Residue. And she is a social scientist who embedded herself in a crime lab for 18 months. And one of the main findings of her book was that forensic science is an extreme case of a captive expert occupation. So you have people who are doing science, producing scientific work product, but all around them, the people they answer to, the people who are in authority, are non-scientists, and they're legal practitioners or law enforcement practitioners of some sort. And so it forces the forensic scientist to have to negotiate boundaries in many different ways. And we're all a product of our social environment. And while it's important for forensic scientists to be brave, to be strong, to advocate for the science, it's really lonely when you're the only one. And so if there can be more people who can advocate for the science, then together you'll be stronger. But being the only one or being that person can often translate into consequences. So if I do what's right, if I advocate for this thing, how am I going to feed my family? How am I going to take care of my children? And so we put forensic scientists in this impossible situation. And so my solution is that as we're asking forensic science to do so much, we need to start asking all the other system actors to do more. And that is my message for you today, system actors, because we need to give forensic science the space to be science, that the space to change, to grow, to develop, to evolve and advance. And the law tends to be very binary. You're good or you're evil. You're validated or you're not. And it really needs to start adapting to thinking about the scientific process. And so this is for judges, this is for attorneys, this is for law enforcement, that the way that you can really support forensic scientists and make sure that they can stand for the evidence is by giving them scientific, operational, fiscal autonomy in their work. And that forensic scientists and crime laboratories should be sister agencies to the other constituents in the system and not subservient to them.
Hannah or Adele, do you have anything to add?
I can say something. So one thing that I was thinking about while you guys were talking is that often, I agree that I've heard that forensic analysts often feel sort of powerless in their role. And I think that they actually do have a large amount of power. It's just there's often not the space for them to speak about their experiences. And I feel like being in this room today, that space is starting to open up. But there are things that individual forensic analysts can do to help achieve justice for all without anything else. And one thing that I often really both worry about and also think about is communication of forensic evidence, and not just in court, because that is one way that forensic evidence gets communicated. But testimony is really hard. I've testified before. It's very difficult to do a good job of it. You have not a lot of control about the questions you're asked or anything like that. But one thing that does have a lot of impact are reports. And forensic reports impact a lot more situations. And those are the things that people are reading before they decide what they're going to do with the forensic evidence. And I do think that there's a lot of space for forensic reports to be more complete, to discuss what the evidence doesn't mean very quickly. It doesn't need to be a lot, but I do think that there's space there for forensic analysts who make an impact on the communication side of things, and that's something that they can work on themselves. Obviously, you can't just go changing reports and the way reports are written, but you can advocate for these different approaches. And if you do see something that you perceive to be impacting your ability to do science in your laboratory, speak out, reach out to someone like us who will empower you to do it. We'll speak for you if you need. There are people who will help you to do that. So if you do feel like you want to say something and you don't feel empowered to do so, there are people who can help you do that.
Thank you. You've all started talking about this next topic, this next question. And I'd like to have you expand a little bit more on that, and that is taking a systems approach to the concept. What challenges do you see in for the concept of justice for all, which exists in the criminal legal system, and what do you think can be done to mitigate those challenges? And I guess, Adele, would you like to start?
Sure. So one of the things that is, I think, hardest about the fact that forensic practitioners have to exist within this adversarial legal system is just that legal change is slow, glacial even, so slow. And a lot of legal decisions are based on precedent, not the best evidence. So you can't rely on the system to change for you anytime soon. And that's really frustrating. I get frustrated by that as well. And so I think that there's obviously things about the system that need to be changed, both culturally and structurally. And I think we need to slowly work away at that as best we can. But while we're waiting for that change, we can't just sit and twiddle our thumbs. I think we need to also work on things at the other end, so like what the Innocence Project is doing, or doing research to show how to make things better for analysts when they're trying to do a good job, and just communicate their evidence the best they can, and trying to work within the system in a top-down way while we wait for that structure to change, and while we wait for the culture of fear of inaccuracy and fear of being wrong to slowly change. And as a psychologist, I know that cultural change is just about as slow as the legal system is to change. So I think it's the people in this room who can work to do that sort of top-down approach while we're waiting for things to change. And that's a big ask, I know, but I see everybody here today, and it makes me hopeful, like Brian Stevenson was talking about, that it's possible. It makes me really excited for it, actually. So, yeah, that's what I have to say about that.
Sarah, you have comments?
So to follow on to what Adele said about fear, and I think that's really important, fear as a barrier to change, and that many forensic scientists have either heard stories of others or have been told themselves by the authorities in their system that you can't make a mistake. And even though we've all talked about how zero error rate doesn't exist, that we're still expecting forensic scientists to never make a mistake. And that when you do, it's going to be a profession ender. And so one of the systems approaches that we can integrate, which some labs like the Texas Department of Public Safety has already started to integrate, is just culture. So just culture is a system where you look not at the outcome of what the problem might have been, but at the intent behind the action. So if someone committed an error or an honest mistake, you address that with consolation, because you know if someone did something by accident, there's no retraining that can that could prevent an accident from happening. And if someone is coloring a little bit outside the lines or maybe skipping a little few steps because they're stressed out about their backlog, that's considered at-risk behavior. And when that happens, the response is to train or redirect the individual. And it's not until activity is reckless or it's misconduct or it's serious negligence that it takes a punitive route. And so my dissertation was focused on looking at quality incident reports. And so much of what happens in the lab is out of the examiner's control. And I'll cite freezer issues, refrigerator issues, oh my goodness. And so when these things happen, we should be approaching them with this just culture approach. And that helps people come forward, that helps with transparency, and that can reduce the fear that people have of raising their hand and saying, something happened here and it needs to be fixed. Now, part of being able to implement a just culture is that the other system actors need to be able to recognize this. So we've looked at aviation and we looked at medicine and how they implement just culture. And one of the ways that they do that is through confidentiality. But the forensic science system can't implement confidentiality because of Brady. So while we can't change how we constitutionally practice forensic science, what we can change is how system actors respond to errors. And so this is another job I'm putting out for you, is that to really think about when these errors happen, is it an honest mistake? Is it at-risk behavior, or is it actually reckless? And then to respond in that way and allow the lab to do that in their responses.
To follow up on that, I in my talks that I've been giving, I call it normalize error, right? In the past couple years in my practice, I have filed a lot of complaints. And I do this, I think, maybe because of my legal training. It's sort of like making a record. You know, I think there's a general reticence for the community to admit the real problems that exist in forensic science. Everybody thinks they're doing good work. Everybody's trying to do good work. Everybody wants to do a good job. And sometimes everybody wants to help. So it's all very, you know, everyone has their heart in the right place kind of work, but there are still problems that exist. And I acknowledge that there are scientists in this room that are not ever going to support oversight, that are never going to support normalizing error, that are going to be too afraid of what the impact to their self will be over the service. They're more afraid of the impact to their career than they are to the impact to the victim or the criminal defendant and the potential outcomes from the downstream justice system for failure to get it right. And until we care about getting it right more than we care about our own self-interest or what could happen if we finally admit that we are not without error, that we make errors normally and routinely because we're human, then I think we are not going to move in the correct direction. And there's a lot of people in this room right now that hear what I'm saying and agree with me 100%, that are on board with wanting to fix the systemic problems that exist in forensic science. And there is a portion of people in this room that are never going to agree to that on their own terms. This community cannot self-police, and we need meaningful oversight to bring the entire field together and get people that may be harboring some misunderstandings or doing things wrong or making too many mistakes, you know, get them the resources they need to get it right, to tighten up this ship and to make sure that we're doing the best we can do to ensure justice for all.
Thank you, Tiffany.
Thank you. I think,
John?
as has been mentioned, I think everybody wants to do a good job. There's nobody that's trying to do something wrong. But from my experience with the recent studies we've been doing with the scientific foundation studies, I've noticed that there's a need to understand where are our limitations. We understand our capabilities most of the time, but do we understand our limitations with the data that we have, and can we convey that effectively to others? And that's something that I think is really important as we go forward, that we are effectively, again, for the justice for the evidence, we want to make sure that it's being shared as well as we can. But we also need to share, these are the limitations. We can't go this far with a low-level DNA mixture or something, you know. We're pushing it so far that is this even a meaningful result? And that's something we have to keep coming back to and understanding. Ultimately, we'd like to be able to see the same result, whether it's in New Jersey or New Mexico, on that same piece of evidence, you get the same equivalent result. That's what justice for all, in my mind, is a key issue here. Can we do that? We need more interlab studies. We need more data being understood about how people are doing in their individual work, performance data, and that will come as people are willing to share that and work together as a community. It's by the small and simple things as we work together that we're able to make change, and that the overall system can improve. So.
And Kim, do you have any words on that? I'd also like to say that some of the speakers are talking about improving the science and being truth-telling with regards to the science. I wonder if anyone can comment on some of the fields like jurisprudence or psychiatry where the concreteness of the science is not the same, where things become a little bit more complicated.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes the field that you're in, what is truth is it's slippery. And that doesn't mean that the conclusions are not useful, but if you think about something like clinical psychology, when you're looking at risk assessment, for example, risk assessment is a really complicated thing to do. But whether or not somebody is a risk, how do you ever figure out if that's true or not? Similarly, in most cases, you will never know if the person who was tried in a trial is actually guilty of the crime. I mean, rarely do we have the luxury of knowing exactly whether that was right or not. So when we're speaking about seeking out truth, forensic science and forensic psychiatry and all of these different sources of evidence and information that are used by the legal system, they are indicators of truth. They are things that we interpret to think about the probability of truth. And so it's kind of like justice for all. We want more truth. We want to get closer to the truth. But we may never know exactly what the truth is, depending on the context that you're in. And sometimes we can get closer than others, but I think that's something that's important to remember, particularly in the legal system, where the whole system is set up to try and interrogate the truth out of a situation. But whether that's actually possible is arguable. I don't know if other people have things to say on that.
Anything to add from anybody else?
I mean, Ken and I both have law degrees, and we understand that a lot of things that are involved in law and some of those other scientific disciplines that don't have right and wrong answers are shaped by people's personal experiences and their life experiences, how they view the world, and what they think is truth, and what they think is right, and what they think is wrong. And there are people in this room that think that they are the good guy and that they are helping victims and getting justice for victims. And there are people in this room that feel that criminal defense is the good work because you're saving people from this wrongful conviction. And those kinds of motivations are really dangerous in science, in objective science, which I feel forensic science should be. Where we should move in a direction that's more objective than subjective. And that's because if we leave these subjective decisions open to human people, those kind of motivations like noble cause corruption and noble cause bias, those things are going to impact the work, the evidence. And so I think it's just, everybody on this panel is like, small changes make a big difference, and I'm working on cases every day. I don't have time to wait for this system to fix itself. And at no point do I feel like I'm patient enough to wait until the ship rights. I want to see change immediately. And this is emotional and personal for me because I'm on the ground. I'm dealing with this every single day. This isn't research for me. I'm not looking at, it's not a study. Case study, right? I come to the same conclusions as Sarah Chu from her research because I'm dealing with human people in real criminal cases. And the sense of urgency I feel to make a difference now is the reason why I feel so strongly we need real meaningful oversight, and not in 10 years and not when we get around to it. We need it right now to start addressing the things that we need to fix.
Mm-hmm. To follow on to Tiffany's call for oversight, which I think is absolutely the thing that we can all support.
Someone's gonna need to print me out a new name badge, and it has to say broken record. Not Tiffany Roy, but you're gonna hear this over and over. Sorry, everyone.
I encourage folks to come to the jurisprudence section on Thursday, where there will be a presentation on behalf of the National Association of Forensic Science Boards, which is an organization that exists to educate, support, and help organize forensic science boards around the country. Because what Tiffany is saying is absolutely true. We need to set these frameworks, and with these oversight frameworks, we can do all the things that John has been asking for. The validation, the interlaboratory studies, that oversight entities can help guide that, can help require that. And oversight entities together that maybe that we can equally ask these things of providers. And I would also add that oversight doesn't have to feel like a cudgel. It doesn't have to feel like it's someone pointing their finger or who's going to be inspecting you for making errors. That oversight can also protect the science. That if the oversight structure says, this is what we expect of scientific practice, then it makes it much harder for the authority of the laboratory that's not scientific to be able to argue against that. And scientists can bring that to the police chief or to the district attorney or to the attorney general who runs the lab and say, this is what is expected of me. This is how I'm supposed to be doing the science. And so I would encourage people to not be afraid of that word and to think about what oversight can do for you. And there are groups of people around the country who are starting to meet and talk about how this can happen in your state. I am trying to keep hope that we can still do it at the federal level, but all of you are constituents in states where you have a say. And so if forensic scientists are asking for this first, it'll make it much harder for the other powers that be to push back on that.
Okay, we're going to move on to the next question, which probably could take an entire session in and of itself, maybe even an entire meeting. And I have a feeling we're going to hear a little bit more about this after your remarks when we open things up for questions. But we have 7 minutes to address this because we do want to ensure that we have time for the audience to come and contribute. But the question, and we're going to start with you, Adele, is technology has always been a factor in forensic practice and advancement.
Thank you.
We are already seeing it now, but as forensic science moves into the future, algorithms and AI will be taking on more and more of the interpretive role. From your perspective, what are the potential benefits and problems associated with these new factors?
It's a really good question. So I know that AI has become sort of a hot topic in most, not just forensic science, in most fields. And as someone who teaches at a university, I'm constantly faced with issues concerning AI and plagiarism. But apart from that, AI is a really powerful tool. It can be really helpful. It can make things more efficient. It can help people make better decisions, but it is still in its infancy. We still don't really understand it. And a lot of them are algorithms that are trained by people in the way that people think. So we can't rely on algorithms just because they are based in math or based in computer science to give us the answers. We need to scrutinize what the role of AI is, and it's definitely great in a supporting role. In psychology, we call that distributed cognition. You offload some of the hard work that your brain has to do to a computer, but you have to have strict protocols about how you use that and what you do to check the results that you're getting, to ensure that those results aren't also putting in place certain biases that might appear as a result of you relying on an algorithm. I think that it's kind of like pretty much any other type of science. You need to be ready to scrutinize the data that you're given. So I don't think that we can call AI an answer. I think it's a powerful tool. I think it's useful. But I don't think that we can rely on it to bring the objectivity that we're hoping for. I think that it can help analysts, address things like their backlogs and work more efficiently and use their resources more efficiently. But I do worry about the impact that it has on analysts' decisions, on how having AI in the forensic world might impact jurors when they're hearing about the evidence, because AI kind of has a mystique around it. They might not understand that AI can be wrong. And so I think it answers a lot of It solves a lot of issues with practicality and efficiency, but it brings to the table more issues that we've not yet reckoned with, and we can't really start to rely on it until we're ready to answer those questions and ready to make sure that the information we're relying on is solid and is reliable. It's like any other kind of information and evidence that you have to analyze. You can't just take it at face value. You need to be ready to scrutinize it. Yeah.
I have an idea about how we can do that. I had a really interesting discussion with Hari Iyer from NIST the other day, and we were talking about the rapid adoption that the field is sort of faced with. We don't always do things in the right order, right? As scientists, sometimes we jump first and then we think about foundation second. And he said to me that he believes that with all of these new technologies coming online and these black boxes and how technical and complex these problems are, that we need a body at the federal level, like the FDA. We would never release a vaccine or a drug for use on human people before it's been thoroughly vetted by something independent than the developer or independent from a laboratory that's already paid for this software. And we need somebody to evaluate these new technologies for fitness for purpose and to define the limits of the technology and whether or not we should adopt it in the field in casework. We should have some type of screening process for that, because there's too many influences right now, commercial, intellectual. We need somebody independent to say, this is good for use, take it and run. We're not worried that you're going to miscarry now.
Okay. Can I jump in here?
Maybe one final comment on this, and then we'll proceed with questions.
Yeah, do you want to say something?
Yeah, go ahead, John.
Yeah,
I'll just say a quick word.
I can't let.
We have the famous quote in Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility, right? As Uncle Ben talks to Peter Parker. And I think that applies as we get greater computing power, are we using it well? So is it accurate? Is it understandable? Is it helpful? And understanding the underlying data and how those choices are made is really critical. In a couple weeks, the National Academy of Sciences is having a workshop on DNA use, particularly with investigative genetics, genealogy, probabilistic genotyping, and phenotyping, and around algorithms. And I'll be curious, I think Sarah helped organize it, and so I'll be curious to see how the outcome that comes from that and the awareness as the further discussion happens in the community.
I'd just like to say one quick thing before President-elect comes up. As Adele mentioned, with algorithms, that can introduce bias, and that's something we have to be aware of with AI. Because my views on this, bias hinders justice. And assumptions, when it rises to that level, or those presumptions, as Brian Stevenson spoke of, those things deny justice. Mm-hmm. But when it rises to the level of discrimination, that defeats justice. And that's what we have to safeguard against. And this is a perfect segue for President-elect Kip Thompson to introduce his theme for next year in just a moment or two.
I hope that segue didn't seem too scripted to everyone, but it actually wasn't. It was a little planned, but not totally planned. So Silicon Valley's motto is go fast and break things. And that might be okay for Uber, Lyft, and Bird, but for the forensic sciences, I'm not so sure. So my name's Kip Thompson, and I'm the president-elect of American Academy of Forensic Sciences. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the theme for next year's meeting, which is going to focus on the responsible, ethical, and just use of new technologies in forensic science. And the title of the meeting is going to be Technology, a Tool for Transformation or Tyranny. And I know that may sound a little over the top to some of you, but if you think of some of the technologies we have now with facial recognition software, AI, and forensic genealogy, other things, fMRI and psychiatry, and some of the things that are being done by authoritarian regimes with those technologies, doesn't strain credulity to too much to think that that could be an issue. And I know that a lot of you are using some of these technologies right now, AI being one, forensic genealogy being another. And I think there's great promise in a lot of these technologies for a lot of the reasons the panelists said, but also there seems to me to be great potential peril in this, and I think this is really something that we need to think about at AAFS, and I know some people have been thinking about it already. So, I think we need to answer questions like, how do we implement and utilize new technologies in an ethical, responsible, and just way? Algorithms, predictive analytics, et cetera. How do we balance the interests of the probative value with privacy concerns? And how do we communicate and educate policymakers about this? Or do we? I think we do have some liaisons with legislators with the CFSO. We have a body, the Judicial Outreach Ad Hoc Committee, which is about judicial education. So I think we have opportunities to inform policymakers about some of these new technologies and how they should or maybe shouldn't be used in forensic science, what their upsides are and what their limitations are. I think that we have a responsibility for that, both from a kind of societal justice standpoint, but also from something of a professional survival standpoint, because I think some of these new technologies are really going to fundamentally transform how we work and what kind of jobs are available. And I think as a professional organization, as the Academy of Forensic Sciences, it's our responsibility and duty to really help prepare our members for these changes that are going to be happening and advocate for them while these changes are happening. So that's going to be hopefully addressed in some of the talks in the meeting as well. So I'm really looking forward to it, and I appreciate the opportunity to come up here and talk to everyone and give a bit of a plug for the meeting. And I really hope to see everyone in Baltimore next year in February. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Kip.
Thank you, Kip. All right, we're going to open the floor for questions and comments. Dr. Miranda, how are you? So please state your name, and if you have a specific question to pose to an individual, mention that individual by name, and we'll get things started. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the panel, and this is a general question. What are your thoughts about reforming education and improving forensic science culture and practice, so before the lab? Thank you.
Great question.
You and I are on a human factors working group, and part of what they were looking at is how we can improve that educational system and standardize training. And I think they looked to the FBI and law enforcement and sort of the centralized training model as a way forward to try to improve the information, centralize the information, and make sure everybody's getting the same information across the board. And the recommendations, I'm not, just a disclaimer, lawyers, I'm speaking my own opinion, and I'm talking about draft recommendations, so I'm not speaking as a working group member right now, and the recommendations are still in draft form, but they recommend like a centralized consortium where you would send your analysts in one specific discipline to be trained in a centralized location, and that's how we would ensure that that everyone is receiving the same level of education and all the same information from a central place.
And just to add on to that too, I am often asked, given the kind of research I do, I'm often asked what people can do to learn about bias and learn about how to reduce bias in their work. And I often get asked about bias awareness training, and I feel like I should use this opportunity to say that awareness is not enough. You can't just be aware of bias. It is something that happens outside of your awareness, so by its nature, you cannot control it. But there are things that you can do, trainings that you can do, that will help you to start to think critically about your work, the information you have access to, and how it might, how bias might influence your decisions. And there's lots of free trainings available. Some of them are from me, some of them from other researchers that are much more established than I, and they're out there.
We published
We did publish a tool. The tool helps. I have done trainings on the tool. So if you are interested in learning more about bias, if you are interested about learning how to reduce bias in your work, it's out there. You just have to find it. So email me or contact me or something, and I'll give you all of it. It's all free. So.
I would add that forensic science education curriculum should have robust ethical education. And we talked about this yesterday in the Sydney Declaration session, where ethical analysis was going to be really important. And so to take a step back, the Human Genome Project was created in 1990, and at the time, Congress created a body within the NIH called ELSI, Ethical, Legal, and Social Implications. So 5% of the Human Genome Project budget was put toward the growing and developing a cadre of bioethicists that would follow all these genetic and genomic technologies as they advanced and grew. And so you always had people who could take a critical perspective and a bioethical perspective of the technologies and methods that were being developed. And bioethicists were involved in the early development of DNA databases in the United States. There were tough conversations about whose DNA are we going to take, how are we going to take them, and what loci should we be using. And since that time, I really feel that that bioethical framework has fallen away as DNA has become more ubiquitous, as processing has become faster and cheaper. And as a result, we've seen DNA and genomic technologies blow up and used in ways that far beyond any societal discussions have been able to really encapsulate and understand the societal consequences. And I'm not talking about ethical education like reading codes of conduct or reading about lab scandals. I'm talking about the kind of understanding about ethical values and what do you do in this situation? Because all of these forensic science students, if they go into crime laboratory work, they're going to be challenged with very uncomfortable situations. And so helping them understand how they're going to navigate that and how to identify when they're being roped into systems of harm, I think is going to be really important, because it's not just about let's put something in the curriculum. It's about educating future forensic scientists, because one person in a lab saying this does not feel okay is one person. But then if every single person being educated on forensic science has those same sensibilities, then you actually can change the culture, you can change forensic science, and you can change practice.
Okay. We have a long queue at the mic, so let's limit it to one more comment. I don't know who wants to.
I'd like to hear more questions. But
yeah.
Well, and that's what I like to say also. We have a line of questions or people that want to ask questions, and I think this is fantastic. And we have a lot of passion up here, so I'm going to ask you to keep your answers concise to 30 seconds or less to give all the panelists an opportunity to respond.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. I'd just say I dedicated my career to writing and helping people learn the technical side, but I agree that the ELSI pieces are needed to be able to move forward. So go ahead.
Right. Denise Valente, I own IMAD, Impairment Measurement, Marijuana, and Driving. We are trying to address a victim to get justice that has been killed by marijuana-impaired driving. There are companies that are rapidly evolving, trying to put forward into the marketplace technologies to objectively measure marijuana-impaired driving. Based on my background as a clinician, having worked in Indian Health Services and ran a clinic in Detroit, several of these technologies have built-in racial biases. How can you compel a company to acknowledge such a bias? How can you compel a company to address this? The biggest example is a company that is heavily funded, uses near-infrared spectrum to read brainwaves, an excellent concept, but it's inaccurate in 37% of blacks. Another technology that's being looked at is eye movement. There is a huge difference in the eye movement of a black male compared to the other extreme, a small Asian female. But none of these groups look at this. So is there already policy to compel evolving technology to at least try to identify racial bias, racial nuances, and therefore address them, or assure the product never goes to market?
Adele, do you want to?
We need that FDA, man. That's what we need. We need a centralized body to evaluate these things. Somebody that doesn't have a financial interest in the outcome of whether that technology is implemented or not. That's the only way forward for questions like that.
You can also just, if you think about facial identification AI, that's now most people know that it's trained poorly, so it doesn't do a good job of people who are not white. And so just making people aware of that has been quite powerful, I think. So, making sure that that's available to people, that information is out there and easy to understand, that's a really important thing too.
Thank you. Peter?
Hi, I'm Peter Valentin. I'm chair of the Forensic Science Department at the University of New Haven. I've been teaching for a long time a course on wrongful convictions, post-conviction work, and forensic science contribution to those kinds of cases. And I think what students are most surprised at is that we're not generally dealing with bad actors. We're dealing with well-intentioned analysts who are at times going in the wrong direction because the narrative for a particular case is solidified very early, and so there is work to be done, but it's in service of the wrong outcome, if you will. And on the post-conviction side, once that narrative has set, it's extraordinarily difficult to see how you undo that. So my question is a really pragmatic one. There's so much resistance to revisiting the case once it's been adjudicated. And I wonder if you could develop a way of indemnifying or sort of removing the stigma of well-intentioned analysts and investigators who did what they thought made sense, but for whatever reason, and multiple reasons generally, it resulted in a conviction that now you'd like to revisit. And you can imagine for personal reasons, for financial reasons, for the state and the participants, they'll never come to that point. And in the movie, Just Cause, to me the most astonishing part was when the state didn't object to the motion to dismiss. Because in all of my post-conviction work, I've never seen that happen, and quite the opposite. They'll push a very bad set of information to preserve a conviction that should have been overturned. So what are your thoughts on that?
I think from my perspective, it's a combination of just fear of being wrong, but also the legal system is not designed to permit change to decisions that have been made. So if someone's been convicted, it's supposed to be final. And there's a reason for that. There is. It makes things very difficult for when things go wrong, but there is a reason that decisions are supposed to be final. And so there's no easy answer to that. The best thing to do is just to help forensic practitioners to think about their potential bias or their errors or have oversight, like Tiffany says, so that we can catch things before they become an issue. And we can catch things before they become embarrassing too. It doesn't need to be a problem that someone's made a mistake. It just needs to be found and addressed. And yeah, people make mistakes. It shouldn't be a surprise to anybody that it happens sometimes.
And to build on that, I think I would prefer this community not to worry about how we're going to come at it from the back end, but how we can ensure just outcomes on the front end by quality forensic science, by stopping the well-intentioned analysts who just maybe have a knowledge gap and getting them the resources they need so they can get it right the first time. Because we're not going to change the legal system, okay? And we have to find a way to best operate within the confines of the laws and the legislature and the politicians that make the rules. And the way that we can best do that is by ensuring we get it right the first time, because it is way too difficult to come from the back end. And there's no way that I can see that we can impose any recommendations or requirements on that legal system.
Prevention's a lot cheaper, right, Tiffany?
Yeah, oversight!
Sarah?
And so in civil litigation, often what they're looking for is if there was misconduct. And I think that one of the ways that we can address what you asked for is to in retrospective reviews, that we're not just asking that question, that we can ask more questions. And I would suggest a framework that comprises of 3 things. First is a quality management question. So was this examiner doing what they were supposed to do according to their policies and procedures at that time? Because you can still follow your procedures and get the wrong answer. And so that would kind of go to intent, right? And then there's the question of, was this scientifically right or wrong? And that's a separate question, and that helps go toward giving restitution to the person who was unjustly convicted. And the third one would be a root cause analysis, or kind of a responsibility question. This has come from a systematic problem in the laboratory, and I credit Keith Inman with helping me with that one. Or was this actually negligence and misconduct? And too often we go into retrospective reviews with narrow questions, and I think if we're looking, using a multi-pronged approach, that we can assess that the good intention, but acknowledge the bad outcome.
I'm going to throw a quick plug in there for standards, by the way, because you mentioned a systemic problem with a laboratory. What if there's a systemic problem with a method? And that's one of the things that standards can improve. If labs are using standards across the board, I'm editorializing, I apologize, that can help the field figure out where that root cause came from in a much more efficient fashion, no?
And I'd have the oversight body force them to follow those standards.
Standards certainly promote uniformity, and that's something that will help reduce or mitigate the effects of bias. And so if we can enforce or at least implement some of those consensus-based standards, those standards that our very own ASB works on as a standards development organization, we can promote that uniformity and help mitigate some of the effects of bias. But it's only through effective standards implementation.
And don't be mad when the human factors people have suggestions about the standards. We're trying to help, I promise.
All right, we're going to move on to the next question.
Hi, my name is Lauren, and I'm a current undergraduate student in forensic science, and I want to know what you think our role is as future forensic sciences to keep the discipline moving towards justice for all.
Another great question. John?
Okay, keep asking questions and critically challenging things. Yep.
And continue to get involved by coming to conferences like this, showing up, participating, showing that you have an interest. That's what's going to be important for the future generation of forensic scientists. So I applaud you for being here, and I look forward to your continued participation in the organization.
Protect the science, that's your role. Really, protect it from the advocates and the law enforcement agencies and any other political pressures or other pressures that might try to exert control over it.
I'm going to jump in on this one a little bit. Don't give up. Because you're going to go into an environment where there's a lot of inertia that's preventing you from bringing forth your ideas that you're learning that are really cutting edge. You know, keep that at the back of your head. Don't give up, because your time will eventually come to actually institute the changes that you're hearing about today. I don't know if you would all agree with that, but
absolutely.
Yeah, I was about to say, like, it made me smile when you came up and asked that question, because it's the people who are coming through and learning now that are the ones that are going to be, I think, the ones that end up like really bringing change, because we're starting these conversations now, and by the time that you're ready to start actually doing something about them, that's when maybe the system will be ready to actually change as well. So you're kind of the essential to our hope, I guess. It sounds very cheesy, but I mean it.
okay. Learn now, lead later.
Yeah, we're waiting for the rest of you to die off.
Come on now.
Just
All right, next
kidding,
question.
I'm just kidding. I want John. Can we clone John? No, we need him.
Next. We have time for 2 more questions.
Which mic is that?
Hi, good morning. My name is Ariel Lee. I'm a graduate forensic science student. My question is, in the wake of the George Floyd incident, we saw, an immense movement that held people accountable for the prejudice for their actions. How do we ensure that progression of that change stays in place instead of this movement becoming just another blip in history?
I will address that.
Yeah, please take it.
George Floyd happened in that incident, and I use that term incident because still to this day, I have to be careful with my word choice. But this is something that we certainly must be aware of, and we have to continue to have these conversations. That is the only way we can truly make a difference. That incident was horrific, but it did bring about change. I was a part of the board when that happened, and we issued a statement, and that statement was a restatement of our mission and our affirmative statement. Some criticized us because they thought it was too weak. They thought we were racist because we refused to take a stronger stand. Some accused us of speaking too strongly and threatened to leave the organization because we were taking a stand against a social issue. That is not the case. We are forensic practitioners. That is justice that was denied. And we must do that as forensic practitioners on a daily basis, continue to promote that justice for all. So that is what we must do. We can't turn our heads. We can't look away. We have a job to do, and that is to promote justice. We need standards to do that, so we have uniformity, and we need to come together. It takes a village to do this. And if we continue to work, collaborate, and come together, we can make a difference. And that is what I will continue to strive to do, make a difference. Justice for all is aspirational. Can we achieve it? Probably not. But can we try? That's what we need to do. Everyone has a role to play in this, and if you look and wait for the next person to do it, it will never happen. We must all do our part to promote justice for all. Thank you for that question. And we'll move to the next one.
Thank you. In the interest of time, we're not going to take any more questions right now. However, people will be available to talk afterwards. I realize that this is the beginning of a discussion, a continuation of a discussion. This isn't the end of the discussion. And I want to thank all the panelists for coming here and having an amazing discussion. And so in the time that we have left, a few minutes here, if in 1 minute or less, each of you could provide a final perspective on this topic from your point of view, that would be appreciated. Maybe we can just start with John and just come around the room.
John.
Oh, I'll start. Okay, thanks. Wilmer Souter, who was the first federal forensic scientist in 1954, going back to the same time when the Pledge of Allegiance was given, wrote an article in Science about testifying. And it's a wonderful article about effective scientific testimony. He had given many, many testimonies. He was quite effective at communicating things. At the end of that article, he quotes the following: "Justice is sometimes pictured as blindfolded. However, scientific evidence usually pierces the mask." And I love that concept, that we have the ability to see better because of the efforts that we make in terms of doing good quality of forensic science. And I hope we can continue to do that. I'm grateful to be a chance to be part of this panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Tiffany.
Yeah, I think I've said my piece, and I think you all know what my message is. I want you to hold yourselves to the highest standards and hold your colleagues to the highest standards, and really make an effort to standardize and objectify the science so that it's best communicated to the people who need to use it to make legal decisions. And so I think the only way we're going to do that is if we ourselves make the call from inside the house that we want to be held to the same standard. We want to make sure we care more about getting it right than the outcomes of not getting it right for us personally.
Thank you very much.
So what do we owe each other? We owe each other, we owe the people in our system, we owe the scientific enterprise robust forensic science. And that means it's tested, it's validated to the point of breaking, and that we know where all the uncertainties in the practice lie. We owe each other systems of repair, like the duty to correct and notify when something goes wrong. We owe each other the ability to look at errors and to talk about them, even if it's uncomfortable, in a just way. And finally, we owe each other, Ariel, thank you for your question, always asking. The way that you keep you keep the memory of George Floyd alive is to constantly ask, every time there's a policy or procedure that's coming down, when you're being asked to do something, to ask the question, is this just and equitable? And ask the people who are telling you what to do to demonstrate that to you. And maybe they'll have to think about it, and maybe they can't answer that question. But we should also always be thinking about that, and that's what we owe each other.
Thank you very much.
So I'd like to talk in my final moments about how we need to remember that error and bias are just a normal, natural human process. It's something that happens, and we need to just put systems and oversight in place to make sure that we catch them early so that they don't become a disaster. And I think that the scientific method, it has been used for centuries to prevent error and bias. It's not a new problem, and it's also not a new solution. I know that it can be scary to change procedures, but the scientific method has shown time and time again that it can deliver equitable outcomes. Obviously, there's other things that need to be done because the scientific method isn't going to fix everything, but it's going to give you a good foundation for what the truth is and for what you can do as forensic scientists to deliver justice for all. And the final thing is just to do more listening. I have learned so much just from staying quiet in rooms where I'm learning about things that I don't know about. I've learned so much about forensic analysis as a psychologist just by being quieter. And I realize I'm saying that as someone who's now on a stage talking. But we all need to do more listening, because that's when we will learn. That's when we'll start to understand other people's perspectives. And I think only then can we really start to address issues. So I encourage you to listen more, even if you think you're not going to like what you're hearing.
And thank you very much. Once again, thank you for all for coming. Thank you for all engaging in this discussion. We hope that you continue these discussions and this thought in your fields and in your future. Any passing?
The last thing I'd just like to say is let's really thank our panelists with a hearty round of applause for coming up here and providing this information. Anything, Ken? Hand it right back to you.
Just thank you for being here, for allowing us to continue this very important conversation. These conversations are needed. Sometimes they're very difficult, but they must be had in order for us to make progress. And as I mentioned, and as Brian mentioned, in order to beat that drum for justice, these conversations are necessary. So thank you to Vinny and Dino for putting this session together. Thank you for the panelists for answering the questions from your heart and showing your passion. And thank you to all of the attendees for being here, because the conversation goes nowhere if no one is here to have it with us. So thank you.